A man's heart can be a fortress, built of stone and ice to keep the world out. For Duke Alaric Beaumont, London's most formidable and broken aristocrat, that fortress was impenetrable. He swore no woman would ever breach his defences again after a devastating betrayal left his life in ruins. But what happens when a single, unexpected sound can shatter the thickest walls? In a ballroom, shimmering with gilded lies and silent judgments, a hired singer, with nothing but a song to her name, does the impossible. Her voice rings out, and the coldest duke in England freezes, hearing a melody that will either be his salvation or his ultimate undoing. The grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor was a universe unto itself, a swirling galaxy of silk, diamonds, and calculated smiles. Under the cascading light of a dozen crystal chandeliers, the cream of London society performed their nightly ritual of polite predation. Mothers with marriageable daughters scanned the room like generals surveying a battlefield, while ambitious young men sought the attention of powerful patrons. And at the cold, unmoving centre of this universe stood Alaric Beaumont, the 8th Duke of Blackwood. They called him the Duke of Winter. It was a title whispered behind gloved hands and feathered fans, a name earned through 5 years of unyielding frost. Since the tragedy that had taken his first wife, Isabel, Alaric had sealed himself behind walls of glacial indifference. He was a titan of industry and politics, his mind as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of ice. He attended these functions not for pleasure, but for appearances, a duty he performed with the grim finality of a headsman. His presence was a weight, a sudden drop in temperature that could be felt the moment he entered a room. Laughter would quiet, gazes would drop, and the vibrant tapestry of conversation would thin into wary murmurs. Tonight was no different. He stood near a marble column, a glass of untouched brandy in his hand, his tall, imposing frame draped in the severe black and white of formal evening wear. His face was a masterpiece of aristocratic austerity, all sharp angles and stark planes, with a jaw that looked as though it were carved from granite. But it was his eyes that truly held the winter. They were a startling, pale grey, like a storm-swept sea, and they saw everything while revealing nothing. They swept over the crowd with a dispassionate air that dismissed every debutante's hopeful glance and every rival's speculative stare. Lord Harrington, their host for the evening, a portly man whose joviality was as legendary as the Duke's coldness, dared to approach him. "Your Grace," he boomed, his face ruddy with wine and exertion. "A fine gathering, is it not? The Duchess has outdone herself." Alaric inclined his head a fraction of an inch, a gesture so minimal it was almost an insult. "Harrington." The single word was low and resonant, yet it carried the chill of a crypt. Undeterred, Lord Harrington gestured vaguely toward the dance floor. "A shame you do not dance, Your Grace. My niece Patricia has been admiring you from afar. A lovely girl, finest equestrian in the county." "I am not in the market for a brood mare, Harrington," Alaric replied, his voice devoid of inflection. The words were not loud, but they were brutally sharp. Lord Harrington's smile faltered, the colour draining slightly from his cheeks. He offered a hasty bow and retreated into the safety of the crowd, leaving the Duke once more in his solitary orbit. Alaric took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of wilting flowers and expensive perfume cloying in his nostrils. He hated these places. He hated the falsity, the endless posturing, the hollow echoes of a life he once believed in. Before Isabel. Before the betrayal that had ripped the heart from his chest and left a frozen cavern in its place. He had loved her with a ferocity that bordered on worship, and she had shattered that love, trampled it into the mud with his supposed best friend. Her death in a carriage accident just weeks after he uncovered her affair had not been a tragedy to him. It had been a bitter, unsatisfying end to a chapter of his life he wished to burn from memory. He had sworn then, over the cold earth of her grave, that he would never love again. Never. Across the room, hidden away near the alcove where the string quartet was taking a brief respite, sat a young woman who was as invisible as the Duke was conspicuous. Her name was Rosalind Vance, and she was not a guest. Her gown was a simple, dark blue muslin, impeccably clean but devoid of the lace, pearls, and ostentatious ribbons that adorned the other women. She was a hired singer, brought in on the recommendation of the orchestra's conductor to provide a short vocal interlude while the musicians rested. Rosalind watched the glittering spectacle with a detached sense of wonder. She had never seen such wealth, such casual opulence. Her world was one of mending worn clothes, portioning out meals for her younger sister and ailing mother, and giving singing lessons to tone-deaf children of the merchant class to make ends meet. Her father, a kind but unfortunate academic, had left them with little more than a mountain of books and debts upon his death. Her voice was her only true inheritance, a gift she wielded to keep their small family from sinking into destitution. She clutched the roll of sheet music in her lap, her palms damp with nervous perspiration. She was not afraid of singing, but she was terrified of this audience. These were not the gentle parish folk or the aspiring middle-class families she was used to. These were sharks in a crystal sea, and she was a minnow. She saw the Duke of Winter from her corner, a figure of dark legend she had only heard about in whispers. She saw the way people avoided his gaze, the aura of power and pain that surrounded him like a shroud. A shiver, not entirely from the draught, traced its way down her spine. The conductor, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, finally caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. It was time. Lord Harrington, having recovered from his encounter with the Duke, moved to the centre of the room and clapped his hands for attention. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice regaining its customary cheer. "If I may have your attention for a moment, as our wonderful musicians take a well-deserved break, we have a special treat for you. A young lady with the voice of an angel has agreed to perform for us. Please join me in welcoming Miss Rosalind Vance." A polite, if slightly indifferent, ripple of applause went through the room. Rosalind's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood, her legs feeling unsteady. She walked toward the small, cleared space near the grand piano, her eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding the hundreds of curious, judgmental stares. She felt impossibly small, a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. She could feel their eyes on her simple dress, her unadorned hair, her gloveless hands. She took her position, gave a small, trembling curtsy, and looked up. For a fleeting second, her gaze accidentally met the cold grey eyes of the Duke of Winter. There was no curiosity in them, no interest, only a profound, soul-deep emptiness. Then he looked away, as if she were nothing more than a piece of furniture. That dismissal, more than anything, steadied her. She had nothing to lose. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and prepared to sing. The hum of idle conversation faded into a respectful hush as Rosalind opened her mouth. There was no piano accompaniment. Mr. Abernathy had insisted her voice needed none. For a moment, only silence stretched across the vast ballroom, a silence thick with expectation. Then the first note emerged from her lips. It was not loud, it was soft, pure, and clear as a drop of spring water. It was a note of such profound, aching sorrow that it seemed to hang in the air, a shimmering thread of silver in the candlelight. She was singing an old Italian lament, a song of a woman imprisoned, pleading for the liberty to weep over her cruel fate. As the melody unfolded, Rosalind's voice grew in strength, swelling to fill every corner of the opulent room. It was more than just technically perfect. It was saturated with an emotion so raw and authentic that it transcended the polite artifice of the gathering. The song told of heartbreak, of loss, of a spirit yearning for release. In her voice, the lords and ladies heard not a performance, but a confession. They heard the echoes of their own private griefs, their own silent heartaches, their own gilded cages. The rustle of silk ceased. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every eye in the room was fixed on the slight figure in the simple blue dress, who stood with her eyes closed as if in a trance, her soul pouring out in a torrent of breathtaking sound. But for one man, the song was not an echo. It was a thunderclap. Alaric Beaumont stood frozen by the marble column, the brandy glass forgotten in his hand. At the first note, he had barely registered it, another tedious distraction in a long night. But as the melody took shape, a strange and violent jolt went through him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in 5 years, a feeling at all. The ice that encased his heart didn't just crack, it splintered. The voice. It wasn't the song itself, but the timbre of the voice. It was imbued with a quality he recognized, a ghost of a sound he thought he had buried forever. It had the same heart-breaking purity, the same delicate tremor of underlying strength that had belonged to Isabel, but where Isabel's voice had been light and carefree, this woman's voice was freighted with a deep, resonant sorrow, a wisdom that spoke of hardship and resilience. It was as if his wife's ghost had returned, not as she was, but as she might have been had she known true suffering. He was oblivious to the rest of the room. He saw only the singer. He saw the slight tremor of her hands, the genuine anguish that creased her brow as she hit the highest, most sorrowful passages. This was not the practiced melancholy of a society lady showing off her accomplishments. This was real. This was pain and beauty entwined, and it called to the frozen wasteland of his own soul. He felt a phantom ache in his chest, a ghost of the man he used to be, the man who could feel, who could love, who could be destroyed. The fortress he had so carefully constructed was being assailed not by a battering ram, but by a single, hauntingly beautiful melody. When the final note faded into the cavernous silence of the ballroom, it left a void, a shared, suspended breath. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the spell broke, and the room erupted in a storm of applause, louder and more sincere than any the polite assembly had offered all night. People were on their feet, their faces alight with genuine admiration. Rosalind opened her eyes, startled by the sheer force of the ovation. A deep blush stained her cheeks as she executed another shaky curtsy. She had only meant to do her job, to earn her pay. She had not expected this. Her eyes darted around the room, overwhelmed, and once again they found the Duke. This time he was looking directly at her. The emptiness in his grey eyes was gone, replaced by an intensity that was far more unnerving. It was a look of shock, of confusion, of something akin to torment. He was not applauding. He was simply staring, as if he were seeing a spectre. As Rosalind tried to retreat back to the relative anonymity of the musician's alcove, a path cleared before her. But it was not a path to escape. It was a path being forged by the Duke of Winter himself, who was now moving, walking directly toward her. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The Duke never sought anyone out. He held court from his icy throne of solitude, and people approached him at their peril. For him to cross the entire ballroom toward a hired singer was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. He stopped a few feet from her, his height and the sheer force of his presence dwarfing her completely. The surrounding chatter died instantly, leaving them in an island of thick, expectant silence. "Your name," he said. It was not a question, but a command. His voice was a low rumble, rougher than it had been with Lord Harrington. Rosalind's throat was dry. She had to swallow before she could speak. "Rosalind Vance, Your Grace." "That song," he continued, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why did you choose it?" It was an odd question. It is a beautiful piece of music, Your Grace," she stammered. "I felt it suited the evening." "It is a song of profound grief," he stated, his gaze unblinking. "A grief you seem to understand intimately. An unusual quality in one so young." Rosalind stiffened slightly at the invasive nature of his observation. Her grief was her own. For her father, for their lost status, for the future she had been forced to sacrifice. It was not for public consumption. "I believe all hearts have known sorrow, Your Grace, regardless of age," she replied, her voice soft but with a newfound firmness. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, passed through his eyes. He had expected a timid, fawning response. He had not expected quiet dignity. From nearby, a sharp, feminine voice cut through the air. "Well, well, it seems our little songbird has captured the attention of a very large eagle." Lady Beatrice Finch, a notoriously sharp-tongued viscountess who had been angling for the Duke's attention for years, glided toward them. Her eyes, small and clever, raked over Rosalind's simple dress with undisguised contempt. "A lovely performance, dear," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So very emotional. One must wonder what a girl like you has to be so sad about." Before Rosalind could respond, the Duke turned his head slowly to face Lady Beatrice. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "Your wonder is an intrusion, Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice lethally soft. "As is your presence." Lady Beatrice paled, her painted smile freezing on her lips. To be so publicly and utterly dismissed by the Duke of Blackwood was a social death sentence. Without another word, she turned and melted back into the crowd, her humiliation a palpable wave. Alaric turned his attention back to Rosalind, but the moment had been broken. The intensity in his eyes was banked, the icy mask slipping back into place. "You have an extraordinary gift, Miss Vance," he said, his tone once again formal and distant. He gave her a curt, almost imperceptible nod, turned on his heel, and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a stunned and furiously whispering crowd in his wake. For 2 days, Alaric Beaumont was a man possessed. He shut himself away in the cavernous library of his London townhouse, a place as silent and cold as his reputation. He did not eat. He barely slept. He paced the length of the vast Persian rug. The image of Rosalind Vance's face and the sound of her voice locked in a relentless battle with the ghost of his wife. The logical part of his mind, the part that had built a commercial empire and commanded the respect of Parliament, told him it was a mere coincidence. A vocal timbre, a chance resemblance in sound. It meant nothing. But the wounded, barricaded part of his heart, the part he thought had atrophied and died, felt otherwise. Her voice had bypassed his defenses and struck something deep within him, something he had long since marked with a tombstone. It was an unsettling, infuriating, and deeply compelling sensation. He was a man who prized control above all else, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt it slipping. On the 3rd morning, he could bear it no longer. He summoned his secretary, a discreet and unnervingly efficient man named Mr. Davies. Davies had served the Beaumont family for 30 years and knew more of the Duke's affairs than any living soul. "Davies," Alaric said, without preamble, standing before the cold fireplace. "I need you to find someone, a singer. Her name is Rosalind Vance." Mr. Davies, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, simply nodded, his pen already poised over a notebook. "Do you have an address, Your Grace?" "No. She performed at Lord Harrington's ball 2 nights ago. That is all I know." "And what is it you wish to know about her?" Davies asked, his tone meticulously neutral. Alaric paused, staring into the empty grate. What did he want to know? He wanted to know where that sorrow in her voice came from. He wanted to know if her soul was as beautiful and tragic as her song. He wanted to know why the universe had thrown this echo of his past into his path. "Everything," he said finally. "Her family, her circumstances, her history. Be discreet." "Of course, Your Grace," Davies replied, and with a slight bow he vanished from the room as silently as he had entered. The report arrived on Alaric's desk less than 24 hours later. It was concise and thorough, a testament to Mr. Davies's formidable skills. Alaric read it under the stark light of his desk lamp, the rest of the library shrouded in shadow. The story it told was one of quiet tragedy and immense fortitude. The Vances had been a family of respectable, if not wealthy, scholars for generations. Rosalind's father, a professor of ancient languages, had died insolvent 3 years prior. He had left his widow, who was in fragile health, and 2 daughters, Rosalind and the younger Catherine, with nothing. Rosalind, the report detailed, had single-handedly kept the family afloat. She worked tirelessly, giving singing and piano lessons, taking any performing job she could secure, no matter how small, and transcribing texts for university scholars. They lived in a modest but clean rented house in a respectable but unfashionable part of Bloomsbury. There was no scandal attached to her name, only accounts of her diligence, her kindness, and her fierce devotion to her family. The report painted a picture not of a cunning opportunist, but of a woman of immense strength and dignity, bearing the weight of her family's survival on her slender shoulders. The sorrow in her voice was not an affectation. It was earned. A strange feeling settled over Alaric as he put the papers down. It was a complex mixture of admiration and something else, something he refused to name. He had assumed, with the cynicism that had become his nature, that her performance was a ploy, a calculated bid for the attention of a wealthy patron. He was wrong. Her art was born of necessity and truth. He found himself acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand. The report mentioned she often visited a particular music shop in Covent Garden, Chappell & Co., to purchase sheet music or rosin for her violin bow. He told his driver to take him to the market, dismissing him upon arrival. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dark coat, devoid of the ducal crest, he hoped he might pass as a mere gentleman of means. He entered the quiet, dusty shop, the air thick with the scent of old paper and wood varnish. He browsed the shelves, feigning interest in a collection of Beethoven sonatas. He waited for nearly an hour, a coil of unfamiliar tension tightening in his gut. He was about to give up, to dismiss the entire venture as a moment of madness, when the small bell above the door chimed. Rosalind Vance entered, a gust of cool autumn air swirling in with her. She was even plainer in the daylight, dressed in a simple grey walking dress with a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders. There were no jewels, no fine fabrics, yet she possessed a quiet grace that the garishly dressed ladies of the ton could never hope to emulate. She did not see him. She went straight to the counter to speak with the proprietor. Alaric watched as she discussed the price of some new Italian scores, her brow furrowed in concentration as she counted the coins from her small reticule. She was short by a few pennies, her shoulders slumped in a gesture of quiet disappointment. It was then that Alaric stepped forward. "Perhaps I can be of assistance," he said. Rosalind spun around, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized him. A flush instantly rose to her cheeks. "Your Grace," she breathed, dropping into a small curtsy. I did not see you. I was just leaving," he lied smoothly. He turned to the proprietor. "Put the lady's purchase on my account, and anything else she might require." Rosalind's blush deepened. "Oh no, Your Grace, I couldn't possibly. It is too kind, but I cannot accept." "It is not kindness, Miss Vance. It is a pittance," he said, his tone flat, though he did not mean for it to sound so dismissive. "Consider it a bonus for your performance. I was impressed." Her eyes, a warm, intelligent shade of brown, met his. There was gratitude in them, but also a flicker of pride, the same dignity he had seen in the ballroom. "In that case, Your Grace." "Thank you," she said simply. He had intended to leave then, to complete his strange mission and retreat back to his fortress. But he found he could not. "You are a long way from Bloomsbury," he observed. "The scores I need for my pupils are only sold here," she explained. "And the walk is pleasant enough." "It is nearly 3 miles, he counted. A small, wry smile touched her lips. It transformed her face, softening its serious lines. "For some of us, Your Grace, a 3-mile walk is a daily reality, not a notable excursion." Her gentle rebuke caught him off guard. She was not intimidated by him. She spoke to him as an equal, a thing few men, let alone a woman of her station, dared to do. "The music you study," he found himself asking, "it is for your pupils?" "Some of it. The rest is for myself," she said, her hand resting protectively on the scores the shopkeeper was now wrapping. "One's own well must not run dry, even when you are giving water to others." The simple poetry of her words struck him. He, who had allowed his own well to freeze over, felt a pang of something that might have been regret. They stood in a strange silence for a moment, the bustling sounds of Covent Garden muffled by the shop's thick glass. He saw the faint smudges of ink on her fingertips, the slight fraying at the cuff of her dress. He saw the signs of her struggle, but he also saw the unbending strength in her posture. "Your performance at the ball has caused quite a stir," he said. Her smile faded. "So I have heard. The whispers are not always kind, Your Grace." "Let them whisper," he said, the words coming out with more force than he intended. "Their opinions are the currency of fools." She looked up at him, her gaze direct and searching. "Why are you here, Your Grace?" He was momentarily speechless. No one asked him for his motivations. They simply accepted his actions as the whims of a powerful man. He had no ready answer, no polite lie. The truth was, he didn't know himself. "I was in the area," he said finally, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. He purchased the Beethoven sonatas he had been holding, a book he had no intention of reading, and turned to leave. "Good day, Miss Vance." "Good day, Your Grace," she replied, her voice soft. As he walked out of the shop and into the chaotic energy of the street, Alaric Beaumont felt a profound sense of dislocation. The cold, orderly world he had built for himself had been disturbed. A simple singer with ink on her fingers and sorrow in her voice had breached his walls. He did not yet know if she was a threat or a harbinger of salvation, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would be seeing her again. The Duke of Blackwood's brief, public conversation with a common singer in a Covent Garden music shop did not go unnoticed. By the following evening, the incident had been embroidered, exaggerated, and woven into the grand tapestry of society gossip. Combined with his dramatic exit from Lord Harrington's ball after defending her, it was enough to create a full-blown scandal. The drawing rooms and private clubs of Mayfair buzzed with speculation. The Duke, who had shown no interest in any woman of any station for 5 long years, was now apparently pursuing a penniless nobody. The consensus, led by the bitter and vengeful Lady Beatrice Finch, was swift and cruel. The girl, this Rosalind Vance, was clearly a charlatan of the highest order, a cunning manipulator who was using some sort of vocal trickery to bewitch the bereaved Duke. "She has him under a spell," Lady Beatrice declared to a rapt audience at a tea party, her voice dripping with venom. "He is a man weakened by grief, and she is preying on him. It is utterly shameless. I heard she practically threw herself at him in that shop." The whispers followed Rosalind like a shadow. When she arrived to teach her pupils, the mothers would look at her with a new, suspicious curiosity. A few clients, spooked by the whiff of scandal, cancelled their lessons altogether, a devastating blow to her fragile income. She tried to ignore the stares and the murmurs, holding her head high as she walked through the streets, but the weight of their judgment was a heavy burden. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. Alaric was, of course, aware of the storm he had created. He read the gossip columns with a grim satisfaction. The foolishness of his peers only served to reinforce his contempt for them. But when Mr. Davies informed him of the cancelled lessons, of the direct harm the rumours were causing Miss Vance, a cold fury ignited within him. They were not just attacking him. They were trying to destroy an innocent woman to get to him. They were attempting to starve her into submission. He would not allow it. His opportunity for a counterattack came a week later, at a charity auction held at the home of the Duchess of Richmond. It was one of the premier events of the season, and all of society was in attendance. Alaric made his entrance, and as usual, a hush fell over the assembly. But this time the silence was different. It was not just fear. It was feverish anticipation. He saw Rosalind almost immediately. The Duchess, a formidable old woman with a soft spot for true talent, had hired her to perform a single song to encourage generosity before the bidding began. Rosalind stood near the stage, looking pale and terrified. She was acutely aware that every eye in this room was on her, not with the admiration of Lord Harrington's ball, but with suspicion and disdain. Lady Beatrice and her coterie were standing nearby, making no effort to lower their voices. "Look at her," Beatrice sneered, loud enough for Rosalind and several others to hear. "Dressed like a housemaid. Does she truly believe that sad little face and a warbling voice are enough to buy her a title?" Rosalind flinched as if struck. Her hands, holding her music, began to tremble. That was the moment Alaric chose to act. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, cutting a path directly through the crowd. He did not stop at a polite distance. He walked right up to Rosalind, so close that she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He ignored Lady Beatrice and her friends, as if they were nothing more than buzzing insects. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, carrying rumble that commanded the attention of everyone nearby. "You look unwell. Are these harpies bothering you?" The insult was so direct, so brutal, that Lady Beatrice gasped, her face turning a blotchy red. The women with her looked horrified. Rosalind was too shocked to speak. She could only stare at him. Alaric's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as he looked down at her. "Pay them no mind," he said, his voice for her alone, yet loud enough to be noted. "Their minds are as barren as their hearts." He then offered her his arm. "Allow me to escort you to the stage. You should not have to walk through this viper's pit alone." It was a declaration of war. By publicly offering his arm to Rosalind Vance, he was not just defending her, he was publicly aligning himself with her. He was using his immense power and social standing as a shield to protect her. Rosalind, her heart pounding, hesitated for only a second before placing her hand on his arm. The fabric of his coat was fine and firm beneath her trembling fingers. As he led her through the stunned crowd, the whispers did not stop, but their character changed. The scorn was now mixed with awe and fear. The Duke of Winter was protecting his own. When they reached the stage, he released her arm but remained standing at the base of the short steps, a silent, unmoving guardian. His message was clear. Any insult to her was an insult to him. With Alaric's formidable presence anchoring her, Rosalind found a new well of strength. She walked onto the stage, her fear replaced by a quiet defiance. She sang a piece by Purcell, a song not of sorrow, but of strength and hope. Her voice, clear and unwavering, soared through the ballroom, a beacon of authenticity in a room full of pretense. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, tinged with the respect that came from witnessing such a public display of courage and ducal favor. After the performance, Alaric escorted her to the Duchess of Richmond. The canny old woman, whose approval could make or break a person's social career, smiled warmly at Rosalind. "A magnificent performance, my dear," the Duchess said, her sharp eyes twinkling. "And a very spirited one. You have more than just a voice. You have character." She then looked at Alaric. "It is good to see you looking after true talent, Blackwood. It is a far better use of your time than scowling at the furniture." Later that evening, as the auction was in full swing, Alaric found Rosalind in a quiet conservatory, away from the noise. "I do not know how to thank you, Your Grace," she said, her voice filled with a sincere emotion that touched him. "You did not have to do that." "I did," he replied, standing by a large fern, his silhouette stark against the moonlit glass. "Their malice is a consequence of my actions. Therefore, it is my responsibility to confront it." He paused, then turned to face her. "I have discovered, Miss Vance, that I have a profound dislike for bullies." In the quiet intimacy of the conservatory, surrounded by the scent of orchids and damp earth, the titles and social chasms that separated them seemed to fall away. She was not just a singer, and he was not just a duke. They were a man and a woman, bound by an unlikely and increasingly powerful connection. "You are not what they say you are, Your Grace," she said softly. "They call you the Duke of Winter, but what you did tonight, it was not cold." His expression remained unreadable, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Do not mistake necessity for warmth, Miss Vance. I am precisely what they say I am. A man whose heart is a frozen wasteland." "No wasteland is forever," she countered gently. "Even in the coldest winter, seeds lie dormant, waiting for the spring." Her simple, earnest words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not an echo of Isabel, but a woman entirely her own. A woman of grace, strength, and a quiet wisdom that belied her years. He was beginning to realize, with a sense of dawning panic and wonder, that his fascination was no longer just about her voice. It was about her, and that terrified him more than anything. The Duke's public defense of Rosalind shifted the social landscape. While the most venomous gossips were silenced by fear, the scandal itself intensified. Now, they were a spectacle. The cold, untouchable Duke and his mysterious songbird. Alaric found he cared very little for the opinions of the ton, but he cared a great deal about the effect it was having on Rosalind. He felt a fierce, protective instinct that was entirely new to him. To mitigate the damage, and, if he were honest with himself, to create a legitimate reason to see her, he made her an offer. He proposed to hire her as a private music tutor for a non-existent niece who was supposedly coming to stay with him. The salary he offered was outrageously generous, enough to secure her family's comfort for years. It was a transparent excuse, a formal way of taking her under his protection. Rosalind, seeing the logic and desperation of her situation, accepted. The arrangement allowed them to meet 2 or 3 times a week in the vast, echoing music room of his London townhouse. These sessions became the focal point of both their lives. There was no niece, of course. Instead, they would talk. He would ask her to sing for him, not the grand arias of the ballroom, but simpler folk songs and ballads. He would sit in a wingback chair, his eyes closed, and let her voice wash over him, a soothing balm on a wound he thought was fatal. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, with the autumn rain streaking down the tall windows, that the ghost of Isabel returned. Rosalind had been singing a gentle Scottish lullaby. When she finished, she found Alaric staring into the distance, his face a mask of such profound pain that it made her heart ache. "Your Grace?" she asked softly. "Are you all right?" He seemed to come back to himself with a start. For a long moment, he said nothing. He seemed to be debating, his internal struggle written in the hard set of his jaw. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he began to speak. "My wife, Isabel," he began, the name sounding rusty and painful on his tongue. "She used to hum. Not that song, but another. A French lullaby her mother had taught her. She would hum it when she was thoughtful, or when she was arranging flowers. It was the sound of my home." Rosalind listened, her entire being focused on him. She knew this was a sacred confidence, a key to a room in his heart that had been locked for years. "I thought we were happy," he continued, his voice low and ragged. "I believed our love was the one true thing in a world of artifice. I was a fool. She was unfaithful. With a man I called my closest friend, Lord Percival Covington." He recounted the story in clipped, brutal sentences. He spoke of finding a letter, of a planned tryst, of the confrontation. He described Isabel's denials, which he had seen as lies, and his own cold, unforgiving rage. He had told her he never wanted to see her again. 2 weeks later, her carriage overturned on a country road as she was returning from a visit to her parents. She was killed instantly. "The official report called it an accident," Alaric said, his voice hollow. "A broken axle. But I have always believed she did it herself, that she could not live with the shame. Or perhaps she could not live without him. Either way, her death was a consequence of her betrayal. And my love died with her. I buried it and swore it would never be resurrected." Rosalind sat in silence, absorbing the sheer tragedy of his story. The bitterness that had poisoned him for 5 years was now horribly clear. But as he spoke, a small, discordant detail snagged in her memory. "The lullaby," she said hesitantly. "The French one. Do you remember how it went?" Alaric looked at her, a strange expression on his face. He hummed a few bars, the melody simple and hauntingly sad. Rosalind felt a sudden chill, a sense of profound unease. She knew that tune. "Your Grace," she began, choosing her words with extreme care. "You said the letter you found detailed a planned tryst. Was there anything else? Anything about why she might be meeting him?" "It was explicit," he said harshly. "She wrote of her adoration for him, of her feeling trapped with me. There was no ambiguity." "But Lord Covington, he was your friend. Did you confront him?" "I did," Alaric snarled, the memory still raw. "He was the picture of remorse. He confessed everything. He said they had been foolish, that it was a terrible mistake. He begged for my forgiveness, the damnable hypocrite. Rosalind's mind was racing. Something was wrong. The lullaby, Percival's confession. It felt too neat, too clean. A fragmented memory from her own childhood was surfacing, something she hadn't thought of in years. Her mother, before her health had failed, had worked as a seamstress for several great houses, including, for a short time, the house of Isabel's family, the de Valois. Rosaline had sometimes accompanied her mother, sitting quietly in a corner while the ladies of the house had their fittings. She remembered conversations, whispers not meant for her young ears. She recalled Lady Isabel, a woman spoken of as gentle and kind, but also deeply unhappy about something, and she remembered hearing Lord Percival Covington's name mentioned, not in a romantic context, but in one of fear. There had been talk of his unwanted attentions, of his obsessive nature. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "what if the story you believe to be true isn't? What if you were all victims of a much darker deception?" Alaric stared at her, his grey eyes narrowing. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Lord Covington's remorse might have been part of the performance," Rosalind said, leaning forward, her own conviction growing with every word. "You described your wife as loving and good. Does a woman like that change so suddenly, so completely? Or is it more likely that a man, spurned and obsessive, would seek to destroy what he could not possess?" The questions hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of Alaric's grief and anger. For 5 years, he had built his life upon the certainty of Isabel's betrayal. It was the bedrock of his misery, the justification for his cold heart. To consider that it might be a lie was to contemplate an earthquake. "You have no proof," he said, his voice rough with disbelief and a dawning, terrifying hope. "No," Rosaline admitted. "I have only a fragment of a memory, a child's recollection of whispers. But I also have that lullaby. I heard it once, Your Grace. My mother was working for Isabel's family. I heard Isabel humming it to her own younger sister, and she told her the song was a warning, a song about a pretty fox with a charming smile and a cruel heart." Alaric went completely still. The lullaby wasn't a song of comfort. It was a warning against whom? The pretty fox with a charming smile. It was a perfect description of Percival Covington, a man known for his devastating good looks and easy charm. For the first time, a hairline crack appeared in the certainty of his wife's guilt. He looked at Rosalind, at the earnest, intelligent concern in her eyes. She was not trying to manipulate him. She was trying to lead him out of the dark. The voice that had broken the silence of the ballroom was now trying to break the silence of his heart, to let in a sliver of light, a possibility that he was wrong, and the thought, as terrifying as it was also the first glimmer of freedom he had felt in 5 long years. The seed of doubt Rosalind had planted grew into an obsession for Alaric. Could 5 years of bitterness have been built on a lie? While he dispatched his secretary, Mr. Davies, to quietly reinvestigate the circumstances of Isabel's death, Rosalind pursued a path guided by a child's fragmented memory. She recalled her mother's meticulous diaries stored away in the attic. With a racing heart, she retrieved the dusty, leather-bound journals and searched for the entries from the year Isabel died. For hours she scanned her mother's elegant script, until she found it. A passage describing a late-night fitting with the distraught Lady Isabel. Her mother had written of Isabel's terror, her words painting a clear picture of Lord Covington's obsessive pursuit and his threats to fabricate a scandal if she spurned him. Tucked carefully between the pages was the ultimate proof, A sealed letter. A note in the diary read, "Her ladyship gave me this letter, begging me to keep it safe. She said if anything should happen to her, I was to see it delivered to the Duke." The letter was addressed to "My dearest Alaric," in Isabel's familiar hand. Rosalind rushed to the Duke's townhouse, the letter feeling like a sacred relic in her hands. She found him in his study, a bleak look on his face. Mr. Davies had just returned with news that the stable boy who reported the broken axle had been paid a large sum by an agent of Lord Covington before disappearing. The pieces were falling into place, forming a monstrous picture. Wordlessly, Rosalind handed him the letter. He broke the seal, his face a stony mask, and began to read. Isabel's words poured from the page, a desperate, loving testament of her fidelity and her fear of Percival's plot. "He wants to isolate me," she wrote, "to make you hate me. My heart is yours, Alaric, now and forever. If you are reading this, it means my fear has come to pass. Do not let him win." The letter fell from his fingers. The carefully constructed fortress of his grief, built on the bedrock of betrayal, crumbled into dust. A terrible, guttural sound of anguish tore from his throat as the weight of his 5-year mistake crashed down upon him. The pain was immense, but as the initial wave of grief subsided, it was replaced by a cold, diamond-hard rage. "He will not win," Alaric vowed, his voice a low whisper of lethal intent. Their stage for justice would be the Duchess of Richmond's annual masquerade ball, the pinnacle of the social season, where Percival would surely be preening. On the night of the ball, Alaric, masked as a dark Venetian prince, and Rosalind, a muse in silver, moved through the throng with a shared, chilling purpose. They found Percival by the fountains, basking in the glow of admiration. "Covington?" Alaric said, his voice cutting through the laughter. The crowd quieted, sensing a confrontation. "For 5 years, this society has known me as a man bitter over the betrayal of my wife. Tonight, I am here to tell you that I was wrong. My wife was innocent." A collective gasp swept through the masked guests. "She was the victim of a cowardly plot," Alaric continued, his voice ringing with power as he turned his full attention on Percival, whose face had gone pale. "A plot orchestrated by a man who, when he could not possess her, decided to destroy her. You forged letters, you lied to me, and then you murdered her." "This is madness," Percival blustered. "You have no proof, don't I?" Rosalind's clear voice cut through his denial. She stepped forward, holding up Isabel's letter. "This is the final letter of the late Duchess of Blackwood, outlining Lord Covington's threats and her fear for her life." She began to read excerpts, Isabel's words echoing across the silent garden, a voice of truth from beyond the grave. The evidence was absolute, the condemnation of the crowd instantaneous. Percival's social world evaporated. As he tried to flee, Alaric seized him. "The law will have you for murder," he snarled. "But your true punishment is knowing you failed. You did not extinguish our love. You only destroyed yourself." He released him, and Percival Covington, the monster behind the charming mask, scrambled away into the darkness, a ruined man. The scandal of Lord Percival Covington's crimes was swift and absolute, his public disgrace and subsequent exile washing away all petty gossip. The Tun was now captivated by the true story, the late Duchess's tragic innocence, and the singer who helped a broken duke find justice. Freed from 5 years of misplaced bitterness, Alaric finally mourned Isabel properly, not as a traitor, but as the victim he now knew her to be. The ice around his heart melted, not from a new love replacing an old one, but from the healing power of truth. Throughout this, Rosalind was his anchor. Their formal arrangement dissolved, replaced by a bond forged in sorrow and redemption. In the quiet hours they spent together, Alaric realized, with profound clarity, that he was in love. One afternoon, he walked to her modest home, not as a duke, but as a man reborn. He took her hands in the small garden and confessed everything. "For 5 years my life was a silent, empty room," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You brought light into the darkness and taught me that a life can begin again." He explained that she hadn't replaced his past, but had healed his present. "Rosalind Vance," he asked, "will you help me build something new? Will you be my wife?" With tears of joy, she whispered, "Yes." Their marriage defied every convention, a testament to a love that had found its voice in the stillness, and Blackwood Manor was finally a home, filled with the music of their new symphony. And so, the silence in Duke Alaric Beaumont's heart was finally filled with a symphony of love, trust, and redemption. He, who was once a monument to grief, became a testament to the healing power of truth. Rosalind Vance, the woman whose voice first broke the stillness of the ballroom, became the music of his soul, proving that love doesn't recognize titles or stations, only the connection between two hearts. Their story reminds us that even the deepest wounds can be healed, and that sometimes the person you least expect is the one who will teach you how to live again. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you were moved by Alaric and Rosalind's story, please don't forget to press the like button, share this video with someone who loves a grand romance, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that will capture your heart.